During the Cold War, the space race was all about one-upping the other guy. It was pure national pride, a battle of technological might. And while one superpower made a very public choice to go for a familiar target, the other, well, they aimed for something way more mysterious. And, as they were about to find out, a whole lot more dangerous.
Right. We all know this part of the story. America, with Kennedy's famous speech ringing in their ears, poured everything they had into landing a man on the moon. It was a huge goal, for sure, but a visible one.
But what about the Soviets? To really stick it to the Americans, they knew they needed a goal that was even bigger, even more audacious. So, if not the moon, where do you go?
They chose Venus, a planet that was, for all intents and purposes, a complete mystery. And their plan wasn't just to fly by, it was to land on and conquer what they would soon discover was, quite literally, a hellscape. You see, the Soviet thinking was pretty clever. Anybody could look up and see the moon. But Venus? Being the first to see what was under those clouds? Now that would be a scientific prize way bigger than just planting a flag on a dusty rock. It was a huge gamble for the ultimate bragging rights. And you can kind of see why they were so intrigued. On paper, Venus looks like Earth's twin. It's about the same size, it's our closest planetary neighbor. But there was this one massive, glaring difference. You couldn't see a single thing on its surface. Not a crater, not a mountain, nothing. It was just hidden under this thick, permanent blanket of clouds. For scientists back then, Venus was the ultimate secret box. What was under there? Could it be oceans, swamps, maybe even teeming with life? The possibilities seemed endless, and for the Soviet space program, the glory of being the ones to open that box was just too tempting to pass up. So they kicked off the Venera program, a whole series of probes designed to punch through that veil of clouds. But they learned something very quickly. Venus was not a friendly place. In fact, it almost seemed like the planet itself was actively trying to kill their machines. And the early missions were just a brutal string of failures. One probe after another was lost. Venera 1 just went silent. Venera 2 died before it even properly left Earth. Venera 3 actually made it all the way there, which was a huge deal. But its systems totally fried before it could send anything back. It just slammed into the surface as a dead piece of space junk. But it was the fate of Venera 4 that gave them their first truly terrifying clue about what they were dealing with. Before it even got close to the ground, Venera 4 was just crushed, squeezed into oblivion by the sheer weight of the atmosphere. The tiny bit of data it sent back before it died was absolutely mind-blowing. The atmospheric pressure on Venus was insane. Way beyond anything they had ever imagined or built for.
The message from Venus was loud and clear. If you want to land here, you don't send a delicate spacecraft. You send a tank. So the Soviet engineers went straight back to the drawing board, now knowing that they were basically designing a machine to survive a literal inferno.
And you can really see the change in their whole philosophy right here. The early probes were loaded up with all sorts of scientific gear for exploration, but Venera 7, it had one job. And one job only, survive. They basically stripped out all the fancy science stuff and just packed on more and more armor. Its goal wasn't to explore, it was just to prove it could land in one piece. And the landing was a complete disaster. The parachute tore, so it just plummeted the last few miles. It slammed into the surface hard, and then toppled over, so its main antenna was pointing uselessly at the dirt. I mean, by every metric, this should have been just another failure. But this Soviet-built tank, was tougher than anyone could have dreamed. It actually survived. For 23 precious minutes, Venera 7 managed to send back a very weak signal, and the data was just staggering. First thing they learned, the surface temperature was 465 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt lead. It's more than double the heat of your kitchen oven cranked all the way up.
Second, it confirmed their worst fears about the pressure. It was 90 times greater than the pressure on Earth. To put that in perspective, that's the same crushing force you'd feel if you were a full kilometer deep in the ocean. Just unbelievable.
And finally, as if the heat and the pressure weren't enough, scientists figured out from the probe's wild descent that the winds in the upper atmosphere were screaming along at 360 kilometers per hour. That's a permanent, planet-wide hurricane, stronger than the worst storms we've ever seen on Earth. Okay, so the Soviets had cracked the code. They'd done the impossible. They knew how to survive on Venus. But just surviving wasn't enough, right? The real prize, the next great challenge, was to actually see the place.
So they designed brand new probes, bigger and better, with one main goal.
A simple photograph, to take the first ever picture from the surface of another planet. And this very simple goal would lead to one of the most frustrating, just bizarre strings of failures in the entire history of space exploration. Just look at this. It's almost painful. 4 missions in a row, Venera 9, 10, 11, and 12, each had 2 cameras, one on each side, to get a nice panoramic view. Venera 9 and 10, they each only got 1 picture back. One side worked, one didn't. And then Venera 11 and 12, they both survived on the surface for over an hour and a half each and sent back absolutely nothing. 0 photos. I mean, just think about that for a second. Years and years of work, billions of rubles, 4 incredibly complex spacecraft sent all the way across the solar system, only to be stopped by the exact same problem over and over again. What on earth could it be? It was a lens cap. That's it. On 4 straight missions, at least one of the 2 little lens caps that were supposed to protect the camera on the way down just failed to pop off after landing. A failure so simple, it's almost funny. But they finally got it right. Oh man, did they get it right. Venera 13 and 14 were absolute masterpieces. They sent back the very first color pictures of that rusty orange landscape. They had a microphone that recorded the first sounds from another planet. You could hear the wind howling and distant thunder. They even had a drill to check out the soil. And in a final perfect ironic twist, the little spring-loaded arm on Venera 14 that was meant to test the soil hardness landed directly on top of its own ejected lens cap, so it ended up measuring the hardness of Soviet titanium instead of Venusian rock. You just can't make this stuff up. The last missions, Venera 15 and 16, didn't even try to land. They stayed in orbit and used powerful radar to basically peel back the clouds for good. They mapped the entire northern hemisphere of the planet, cementing the Soviet Union's legacy with this world. All told, the Venera program, through decades of incredible effort and some spectacular failures, gave us our first complete picture of Venus. A world with crushing pressure, lead-melting heat, a thick carbon dioxide atmosphere, clouds literally made of sulfuric acid, and a surface of cracked volcanic rock. They didn't find lush jungles or alien oceans. They found hell. The Soviets did what no one else could. For a while, people even called Venus the Soviet planet. They mapped it, landed on it, took pictures of it, even listened to it. So that leaves us with one last question. After all that work, all that struggle to conquer it, why has no one ever gone back to the surface?